plenty of right-wing ideologues should not have guns. They think plenty of violently anti-trans people should not have guns. They think violent misogynists should not have guns. They think violent racists should not have guns. I think those who have the audacity to believe in ideology that is, in fact, an incredible danger to most of us who are in society that do not look like them, should not have access to guns.
Hey guys, Brad and Hannah here, and we're going to react to a really interesting debate on gun control that Vice just did with a panel of people from all over the spectrum. But Hannah, we've already watched this, but now we're going to go over some highlights. What did you think out of it? I thought it was interesting, but kind of a mess.
Well, when you say it was all over the place, truly, like there were no ideologues on this, it seemed. I really didn't think anybody had a consistent viewpoint on the gun rights debate. So it really was, I don't know, people were just kind of all over the spectrum. You really didn't know what to expect from anybody, but I did think they covered a lot of ground. I didn't think that they covered all the points I would have hoped to see brought up. So I think that's where we're going to come in and try to fill in the gaps because a lot was left on the table.
Yeah, so the first interesting moment that I saw and I took note of was here where this woman said that she used to be really pro-gun control, but she's actually changed her mind on it, and here's why.
Well, I actually used to be a gun control activist, and there were certain events that were happening where violence against trans women was, increasing across the country. And there was this one video that went viral where a trans woman was violently mobbed in a gas station one night, and that was a clicking moment for me. At that moment, I was like, you know what? The only thing that would have stopped her from this violent mob was, in fact, a gun.
So for a second, I thought this chick was going to be based, but she went on to say some things in this video that were very not based, that we will come back to. But what she's just said there makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, when she first said it, I was like, yes, girl. I mean, this has been my experience working with people on the left. A lot of people know I've done a lot in criminal justice reform. I've worked with very far left groups, including like Southern Poverty Law, ACLU. And what I have found is that those people, as far left as they are not anti-gun because they truly get it. They know that guns are not what drives crime. They know that removing guns does not only not stop violence, but it actually ends up targeting black and brown people who end up getting the brunt of those laws. And so they end up not even working on gun control or actually being pretty opposed to it, even if they're personally not like pro-gun or people who carry guns. So I thought she was sort of falling into that vein. She sounded like she was an activist. She's actively witnessed people who are vulnerable, trans people being targeted and recognizing like, oh, a gun is what they need in these situations to actually protect themselves and make them equal. But as you mentioned, the rest of the panel, she went on to say, I would argue some of the craziest comments that were made.
Oh yeah, all the craziest moments from this came from this person. So at first she started out strong, but then didn't go very strong after that.
I kind of think she supports gun rights for trans people, and that's about it, is what I'm getting from her.
Yeah, which that's not how that works. You can't.
It's a start. Maybe
a start,
but you begin and you keep getting a little bit more awake as you go. But
it was interesting because there were a few people on this panel who clearly were pushing gun regulation and gun control, but then there were a lot of people who were pushing back on it, but almost from like a woke perspective, which is interesting because they actually have a point. But they're like, these rules will ultimately be enforced against the people in our society who are marginalized, as they would like to say, and that's a valid point. Take a listen to this one clip.
Move your finger and you end a human life. That's a responsibility that we should take a lot more seriously in this country. You get convicted of domestic violence. No guns for you. Universal background checks, I think, would be a great idea. And I think the idea that we don't treat something that was created for killing people with that kind of respect is a really weird disconnect in this country.
I think a big problem with people have with like universal background checks, requiring regulation and accreditation. I teach and I give out certificates and all that, but states have been sued for the fact that they won't give it to BIPOC. They won't give it to poor people. They won't give these rights to trans people. You start denying these rights and like, oh, well, we regulate this, but we only give it to the rich and we only give it to the well-connected.
So I love that this guy brought this up. I did an entire episode of my show based back in the day on the history of gun control laws. And it is without a doubt in black and white that the vast majority of gun control laws were initially put into place to block black people from obtaining guns and to block poor white people from obtaining guns. It's always been about suppression. It's always been about trying to keep marginalized people down because people who can defend themselves, or people who can't defend themselves, are much easier to control. And that continues to be the way that these laws are utilized to this day. Radley Balka, who I think is one of the best criminal justice reform writers out there. He's a great researcher. He produced an entire body of research for the Washington Post, basically just summarizing all of the vast amount of studies out there showing all the systemic racism in our justice system. And there's a whole section on how gun control laws specifically continue to target Black people and people of color at far disproportionate rates than they do white people. And so to me, when you see people who are really woke and who want to talk about systemic racism, then coming in and arguing for more of these laws, it's such a complete disconnect that it's kind of difficult to even watch.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too because a lot of the stuff does sound reasonable. Like the guy has a point. We're talking about guns, and those are life and death. And it should be taken very seriously. Gun rights should come with responsibility and gun safety and all those things. But then they try and say, so we should have permits and registrations and you should have to do this many hours and all these things. And a lot of it sounds reasonable enough on the surface, but then you have to think about the implementation. And someplace like New York City, for example, they had to fight for, people had to fight them all the way to the Supreme Court because their concealed carry permit system, they basically never approved it unless you were a celebrity or had they made you prove some special need for a gun. And so the everyday people wouldn't get those permits approved, but of course, like the celebrities got theirs approved. And it really is true that when you have these kinds of systems that sound all fine and dandy, they're going to end up being circumvented by the well-off and the well-connected and harshly enforced on the more marginalized people in society. So it's just not woke to support this kind of stuff.
And not only that, but let's take it to a very red pro-gun state like Tennessee, where I lived and worked for many years. You have to go to a class to get a gun permit in Tennessee that cost, I think it was like $150, $200 10 years ago. Who knows what it is now? It takes an entire Saturday, 8 to 10 hours. I took the class. It could be summarized in an online, like 1 hour class, trust me. But like somebody's getting paid to teach those classes who's buddy with the state. And then you have to go and pay for a permit that's another like $150 a year. Guess who can't do those things? People who have to work on Saturdays, people who don't have a casual $500 plus whatever it costs to actually purchase the gun.
Single moms.
And so you're saying that the right to self-defense is based on how wealthy you are if you can afford to jump through these hoops. That is bogus. Your right should never be conditional on money and what you can afford. And as a whole, we know that the permitting in these classes, they don't do anything to make people safer. And that's what I think you have to go back to is we want to solve violence. We want to prevent violent crime, but gun control is not the solution to that. People who are committed to carrying out crimes, who are committed to being violent, are going to find a way to do it. And so what we have to do is have ability to identify who those people are, intercept them before they do it. And that actually comes down to the ability to be better at solving crimes, better at actually getting people off the streets who are going to be repeat criminals. Nothing has to do with gun control. So I'm really kind of tired of these arguments. And that's why you see constitutional carry getting passed state after state after state, because we're looking at the data and we're saying all of these loopholes, all these barriers you have to go through, they don't make you safer. They just make poor people and people of color targets and more likely to be victims.
Well, and the next part of this debate got kind of silly when our friend from the first clip, she said that America's gun problem and gun obsession is all just because of the gun capitalists.
In America, the two solutions that are introduced are too heavily focused on the individual and the gun. But a solution we never introduced is regulating the gun industry and the profiteers of massive amount of weapons being introduced into America. And I think that's something that in America we're not talking about. We're not talking about how do we hold the profiteers, the gun capitalists accountable.
So I felt like I lost brain cells watching that. I don't know about you, but that's just complete gobbledygook babbling.
I mean, you can tell she's actually never worked anywhere close to this entire debate because, ma'am, the left has been trying to go after the gun manufacturers for like the better part of a decade and even has gotten some wins in the courts. But that should not be the end all goal here. As a whole, like I think that is a really misguided idea of how you solve violence. Again, we don't go after car manufacturers because people drive drunk in an Audi. That is one of the most dumb arguments I've ever heard that actually takes the blame off the individual who's responsible for the violence, for the criminal act, and puts it on people who've done absolutely nothing wrong. I think that that is just completely misguided. I also think it's desperate. They have just lost when it comes to trying to take away the Second Amendment. And so now they're trying to go after the manufacturers and go after a liability issue, which I think is a vulnerability in our system because we do have such a litigious society and because it is so easy to sue people. Like that is a whole problem with the court system that's much bigger than the Second Amendment argument. But that's been their plan of attack. I think that as a whole, though, it's really misguided. It's not something that we'd ever want to see a precedent set for, because if you were to do that to the gun industry, like, baby, you can do it to any other kinds of industries you want to. Like, trust me, we can start getting real crafty on this.
Yeah, it's a good point you make about the cars, right? Like, oh, well, you can't sue a gun manufacturer over a mass shooting. Well, why would you? They didn't do it. Their product was misused by somebody. That's like, exactly. It's like saying that if I use a kitchen fork to stab somebody, I should be able to sue the Tupperware or the silverware company. Like, huh? Like, I don't get it. I think it's weird. It's a weird deflection. But trust me, her takes...
Say capitalist. That was her buzzword of the day. She's like, gotta get capitalism in there.
She's like, how can I work capitalism into this gun debate? And then the other woke person in the background's nodding like an NPC, like, yes, capitalism bad. But then they got into a very somber and serious topic, which is school shootings and what to do about them. And here, I thought some interesting points were made. And I have mixed feelings on some of this, actually. So I want to get your take. But guys, take a look at this.
I feel like a lot of the gun control issues drown out the actual issues. Like, let's take school shootings, for example. School shootings are awful. They're horrible. But here's my question. What has been done to make schools more secure? I do executive protection and armed security, and I've been offered countless times jobs at schools. They pay $12, $13, $14 an hour. A single mother with 2 kids, that's not an amount I can work for, nor does it reflect my value as a security officer. But what is being done for it? We're not paying security extra. We're not, doing single points of entry. We're not reinforcing the perimeters. We're not doing any of those things. We're focusing on gun control, and yet when this happens again, we're confused as to why it happened again, because nothing was done to stop the problem.
I don't think, turning schools into fortresses, having more armed security is the solution here. I'd rather have a part-time school counselor than a full-time, resource officer.
There are counselors, though.
But are they? Like, when you put a police officer in a school, you're creating an environment where you're putting students in jail or in prison instead of going after the problems. Instead of spending money on lockdown drills, crisis actors, we could give them more food security. Community garden is probably going to go way farther for their mental health than simulating gunfire in the hallways. If we do have school shooters, well, where are they coming from? They're coming from the school. We're letting these kids down. We're showing them the rehearsal. And then what? Tragedy?
So I thought a couple kind of silly points were made there. Like, I don't think a community garden is going to make a difference. And also, like, you can have a counselor and a resource officer. These things aren't mutually exclusive. You could pretty easily fund those both with how much we spend on education. But I have mixed feelings on the whole thing, because I don't know about you, but when I was in high school, we did lockdown drills for school shootings, and I felt very scared. I've thought about, will my school get shut up a lot? And I had anxiety issues, and but I really was a little bit like adversely affected mentally by this idea, and it was reinforced through these drills. Yet, with the actual facts, even from the Washington Post, let me just read you this. The statistical likelihood of any given public school student being killed by a gun in school on any given day since 1999 is roughly 1 in 614 million. So these things are horrible. These shootings are horrible, but they're so incredibly rare. Yet we scare kids with these drills. So I think maybe the drills I don't really support. But at the same time, I think the idea of having officers or armed security and having, single points of entry and security bolstered up at our schools, I do think that idea makes a lot of sense when it comes to keeping our kids safe. Why are our jewelry stores more heavily protected than our children? I do think that's a viable response to shoutings.
So there's a lot to unpack there, and I think I actually disagree a little bit on a few things. One, though, I grew up mostly being homeschooled in private school, and sorry, but these things don't happen in private schools. I mean, it's rare that happens in public schools. It doesn't happen in private schools. And so we didn't have lockdown drills. We didn't do some of this, and it does sound scary. It does sound traumatizing. I know my mom briefly taught in the public school system. It was such a wreck. She didn't last long in there. She left But even hearing about what they were telling her to do and training for that, it was traumatizing. And she was traumatized by it. She's like, how is this what we're told to do? Like, how am I not allowed to defend myself? How am I supposed to tell the kids to sit here and be sitting ducks while we wait to see if somebody comes and shoots? I mean, it's not even good advice, first and foremost, but secondarily, like, going through that process does sound very scary, I'm sure, especially if it's a young kid. it'd be even more scary. So I'm sorry you went through that. I do think those should be done away with. But I think in replacing them, you have to start asking, why does this happen in public schools and not private schools? And that's because private schools vet their students pretty well, first and foremost. And I think you can identify who is prone to be a mass shooter and who's not. We know what the identificators are. We know what the early signs are. And police are not doing what they need to do to start identifying and apprehending these people. Half the time it happens, we find out these people are already on their freaking watch list. Right? Like half the shooters that we saw last year were on FBI watch lists, were known to police. They knew they were problems. The family had even reported them at times, and they don't do anything to intercept them and start intervening. There's a profile. They are lonely, sad, incel men that are angry at the world, and we need to start doing more to like actually intervene. I don't think that having more cops in schools is really an answer. Yes, you could have a mental health resource officer. Yes, you could have a cop in the school. But what happens right now is the mental health counselor's reporting, this kid's a problem, this kid's a problem, this kid's a problem, and nothing happens until they do something. So like that is a structural issue.
But what can they do? Because it's like we can't imprison people for pre-crime, and for every one that does a shooting, you know, there's 100 or 1,000 more of those types of people who don't. I mean, what can we do?
Yeah, I think this gets into like probably one of the murkiest areas of lines of thinking and libertarianism, which is like, when do we intervene when someone clearly is a threat to society based on their mental health? And they haven't done anything yet, but you're pretty sure they will. And we used to put people like this in asylums. I'm not arguing to go back to that, but I will say you didn't see these things happening before we ended asylums in the 1980s. So that we have to figure out a better middle ground for identifying people who are like an obvious threat and at least getting them into treatment programs and making sure that we are doing something to intervene, blocking them from the schools. And then I'm still in favor of letting teachers arm themselves. I mean, we have statistics that show that when people know there are guns somewhere, they are far less likely to go commit crimes. Schools are sitting ducks. That is known. That's why you mostly see these kinds of mass shootings taking place at schools, because they're vulnerable people. I mean, it's not a conclusive study, but we've seen in a few different pieces of data that produced 60% of convicted felons say they avoid committing crimes when they know that victims are armed. 40% of convicted felons admit that they avoided committing crimes when they thought the victim might be armed. And felons also report entering homes where they think people might be at home because they fear getting shot. So as a whole, these people are going places where they know no one's going to fire back. And just putting cops in the school, which is something that they do when they're looking at data to say like, oh, it wasn't a gun-free zone because a cop was there. Well, cops have no duty to intervene. That is according to the Supreme Court of the United States. They have no duty to intervene. We saw that in Uvalde. We saw that in Parkland. So just having cops on hand does not make you any safer because they're going to protect themselves. I think giving teachers the ability to protect themselves, making sure that perpetrators know these are not gun-free zones, these aren't, people who are sitting ducks, and then having other safety security protocols. Like, I'm iffy on some AI software and the potential for it to be used in nefarious ways in society, but I think having AI software on school properties where it can immediately alert and lock down the school when somebody who's known to be a threat shows up, these are some good things we could start integrating. And with the amount of money that's being spent in our public schools, being wasted in our public schools, which is something like $15,000 per kid per year, those dollars should be diverted to these kinds of things instead of funding, $50,000 football stadiums or paying principals $250,000.
I don't know, Hannah. Arming teachers in school sounds like some very far-right ideology. I think, and this woman that we discussed earlier actually went on to say in this panel that she thinks people with right-wing beliefs shouldn't be allowed to own guns. I wish I was straw manning her. I really wish I was, but listen for yourself.
I'm curious, who are the people who you think shouldn't have guns? You say there are certain people. What do you have in mind?
Well, I certainly think plenty of right-wing ideologues should not have guns. I think plenty of violently anti-trans people should not have guns. I think violent misogynists should not have guns. I think violent racists should not have guns. I think those who have the audacity to believe in ideology that is, in fact, an incredible danger to most of us who are in society that do not look like them should not have access to guns.
So she literally said that people who have the audacity to believe things she doesn't agree with shouldn't be allowed to have guns. What?
Yeah, I like how also she's like violent racist, violent misogynist. What is defining, like, just violent people? We should just say anybody who is a violent person should not have guns.
No, but she means their ideas are violent.
That's what I'm getting at. It's like it's not that they're actually violent. She's saying like your speech is violent, your beliefs are violent, according to me, and therefore you shouldn't have guns. You think things that I don't like, therefore she wants to basically take away people's guns based on thought crimes, according to her ideology, which actually is like more along the lines of like a violent line of thought than anything. She's
kind of fascist.
Yeah, pretty fascist, like pretty authoritarian and creepy, and like, ugh. And the fact that like it blows my mind, these like little girls on the left are just like, yeah, like maybe we should try fascism. And,
Yeah.
innocence.
It's just, I don't even know how to respond to it. It's so insane to suggest that people's beliefs should make them eligible or ineligible for the right to self-defense in this country. It takes some degree of audacity to believe that you have the right to dub some people undeserving of fundamental rights because you don't like the things that they think. I mean, this person has clearly some kind of God complex. Like, she thinks people should be she can decide for everyone else what rights they are allowed to have and whether they can defend themselves based on whether she thinks their ideas are mean and hurt her fifis.
Like, I don't even know if it's an audacity or a superiority complex versus it is just like a very unserious nature and a very lack of, she's a person lacking in depth, right? Like, you don't understand very much about the subject you're talking about. You don't have a lot of nuance to you. You certainly don't have a lot of humility to how you approach these things. You're not thinking things through. You don't even know enough about the ideas that you oppose to like actually present them in a fair and accurate way. And so to me, it's not even like, I guess it is audacity, but it's audacity that comes from pure ignorance.
Yeah. Well, speaking of pure ignorance, they got into, like any gun control conversation has to these days, a conversation about the AR-15 and whether anyone really needs an AR-15.
Do you support restrictions on specific types of guns like the AR-15, for example? If so, why or why not?
You know why the AR-15 is popular is because it's affordable. You can customize it to whatever you need to do, whether it's self-defense, hunting, target shooting.
I think what you just said, though, is part of the problem, too, because the AR-15 is really like, it has a marketing appeal. And America does marketing really well. Mm-hmm. And people respond very well to marketing, especially if you're selling them something they already want. So it's very convenient. The pedestal kind of grew up under it. But now that it's there, it's very hard to take that back.
Who are you trying to defend yourself from with an AR-15?
I can
a
answer
zombie
that.
apocalypse?
Anyone.
Someone else with an AR-15.
The logic.
No, the thing is, as a responsible gun owner, a person who owns several rifles, our president is protected with rifles, AR-15 style rifles. Our law enforcement officers use, carry, and have AR-15 platform rifles. So if I'm defending myself against, a lot of the 2A people will say my government, I have to have equal or greater access to the tools that they have as well. Is the president's life more important than mine?
So, Hannah, can you believe the AR-15 has marketing?
It sounded like actually what it has is functionality. I don't think it has such great marketing, except for the fact that the left won't shut the F up about it. Like, I don't ever see like AR-15 commercials. Like, it's
These
not
people make me want an AR-15.
That's what I was thinking. I'm like, I don't even have an AR-15. I wouldn't use it, but it kind of makes me want to get one just to like spite these people because they're so hung up on what is literally a rifle with a hard black casing on it. Like
it's not that different from so many other guns, but they've picked this one specific model to harp on and obsess over, and it's just. I was doing some statistics recently for an article I wrote about this, and there are at a lowball estimate 16 million AR-15s in the United States. And every year there's like 300-ish people killed with rifles of any kind. So like 99.9999% of AR-15s are not used ever to murder anybody. So it's just scaremongering. And then I thought that one girl explained it well when she was like, to defend myself from somebody who has an AR-15. That's why I need one.
Yeah, girly on the back left was probably the most based on the panel. And I like that she brought up, like, why does the president get to be protected by these kinds of guns and I can't? Is his life more important than mine? Like, that is the point of the Second Amendment, is you can defend yourself however you need to or want to, but also you should be able to defend yourself against the government. And if they have these guns, then you should have them too. So my new litmus test, though, is for anybody talking about banning an AR-15. One, I want them to tell me what AR actually stands for, and they're going to flunk it. They're going to think it's assault rifle, which we know it's not. It's Armor Light Rifle, guys. It's the name of the brand. But secondarily, I'm going to ask them to name any other gun. Name one other gun. Name any other gun. Like, actual brand or, like, I want to hear it. Like, please. come out with it. Let's hear it because you know so much about guns and their functionality and which ones are more dangerous. And like, it's just such an NPC thing. The only reason you're targeting AR-15 is because your media and your Democrat politicians told you to, and you're just like, yes, gonna regurgitate this now. You don't know what you're talking about, and it's so apparent. And like, to me, if I'm trying to change somebody's mind, like let's say I'm on their side, I'm actually literally trying to change your mind, I'm going to know your argument and why you believe what you believe like the back of my hand before I approach you in order to try to convince you to come to my side. That's why I was so freaking good at moving Republicans on the death penalty, because I understood where they were coming from and supporting it, was able to actually appeal to their arguments and present better data. The left continues to just spew utter hot garbage at us and thinks it's going to like somehow sway us. I'm like, all you do is make yourself look completely obtuse and completely removed from the actual arguments of the debate.
I think that this part was clownish, but I also think fundamentally some of these people do not believe, like the guy who's saying, why do you need an AR-15? They don't believe in a right to self-defense. That's really what it comes down to. And this next clip really shows that.
I have a question. If we get rid of AR-15s for law-abiding citizens, how do we defend ourselves when those two guys, and don't say that's not probable, because 2 guys is more probable than 30 guys to kick in your door. How do I defend myself and my children against those 2 guys who have AR-15s? Tell me how. And you said yourself that the police may not make it there in time. Tell me how I defend myself.
The best chance you got in a situation like that is to get out the house.
And
if you're going to have a
where?
shootout with 2 people with AR-15s and your children at home?
She just stated that
so
they
what is that,
reach
30
far.
rounds apiece? That's 90 rounds of bullets firing through the home?
And you think I can outrun that?
You need to get out of the house.
Oh, sir, I stand my ground. Sorry.
You got a better chance of jumping out that window than having a shootout with 2 AR-15s.
I do not have a better chance.
Yeah, so I think you're exactly right, especially that one guy on the back. He pretty much throughout this entire panel continuously says like that having a gun would not save a life, that you can't fight back, that your best chance is to just run. And I understand that he does not feel capable of defending himself, it sounds like, but sir, quit projecting, because we know about 2.5 million crimes are prevented every single year thanks to a firearm. Many of those people who would have been murdered. Now, put that number in contrast to the number of lives that are lost. Last year was actually one of the highest number of deaths that we had due to guns, and it was something like 450,000 people who died. Now, keep in mind, 54% of those were suicides. So the number of people who are losing their lives to actual gun violence, gun homicides, compared to the number of lives that are saved, it dwarfs it in comparison. So he's utterly wrong. And I can't stand this kind of mentality, especially from a man who's too cowardly to defend himself, so he wants to strip everybody else of their right to defend themselves.
Not hot. No. I mean, and I get it. Like, you don't have to own guns if you don't feel comfortable. If you don't feel capable of defending yourself, that's totally fine. But don't, like you're saying, don't project that. I mean, somebody tweeted something similar, like no one has ever used an AR-15 for self-defense. And everyone was responding with all these news headlines. Pregnant woman fights off 2 armed home invaders with AR-15. Like, all these countless anecdotes, and there's the data on defensive gun use is so much more common than violent gun crime. I mean, they can't pretend that self-defense isn't a widespread thing. The other thing, too, it's like maybe they would have a better argument if we were planning a society from, like, ground zero and saying, should we have AR-15s or not? But we already have millions of them in circulation. So a criminal is going to be able to get them for the rest of our lifetimes, even if they were banned tomorrow. So what you're saying is we need... They will have them, and and so we won't have equivalent firepower to defend ourselves, but they'll still have them. That does not sound like a good idea to me.
It's just highly naive. And again, you know, we covered this at Base Politics this week, but if you look at the actual numbers of gun violence and gun deaths in this country, it's heavily concentrated. And so just to circle back to this again, we know things we could be doing to actually protect lives, to actually ensure people are safer. And it's a concentrated problem. In the vast majority of the country, especially areas that have higher rates of gun ownership, rural and suburban areas have something like 79% more guns than people in urban blue cities do. And yet they have far lower rates of violent gun crime. This is a concentrated area issue, even within those cities. It's something like a small percentage of the counties within major cities that have these issues are the key problems. So we need to concentrate on going after those areas, going after gangs in those areas, going after known perpetrators, and like leave the rest of Americans alone and let them defend themselves.
Yeah, here's what my final takeaway is: Vice needs to have us on these debates because we would just wipe the floor with all of these people.
I bring the fact. I have more data in my head, I think, than most of these people combined. Like, I'm always astounded at the lack of just data in these debates. I'm like, does anybody have some number? I have numbers. I'd like to present some numbers. So Vice, hit us up. We'll bring the fire.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, if you enjoyed this, be sure to like, consider subscribing, comment, yada, yada, yada. I'll put the full link to that full debate if you want to watch the rest in the show notes. But until next time, we'll see you in the next video.